This week on Full Circle Florida, signed, sealed, delivered. The budget finally signed, but at what cost? And are the governor and his lawmakers friends or foes? Alligator Alcatraz revealed this week. Is this a real plan or just another publicity stunt? Tallahassee correspondent Forrest Saunders on the governor's swamp show. The big, beautiful problem. What's actually worse, Trump's budget bill passing or failing? Dan Snell joins me with a reality check. Plus, the foreign drug crisis. Your medication is not made in America, so where's it really coming from? Dr. Bill Hennessy on why the U.S. is hooked. And my deep dive this week, Iran's cyber threat. Is hacking U.S. infrastructure next? Welcome to Full Circle Florida. Iran's hackers are sharpening their claws after attacks on their nuclear sites. Could U.S. infrastructure be next? Here's my conversation with Damien Fortune from the cybersecurity firm Sentriqs, the looming threat, and how America is fighting back. It feels like we, as America, has moved on from Iran, but I don't know if Iran's moved on from us in the wake of what has happened in the last couple of weeks. So cybersecurity is a big topic. I know you cover this. How sophisticated are Iran's hacking abilities, and how big of a threat is this to the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the answer to the first part is extremely sophisticated. You know, our national adversaries, North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, spend a lot of time and a lot of money investing into these programs. They have for a long time viewed cyber as kind of the next generation of warfare. So everything from having folks within their own military and intelligence communities having these sorts of offensive cyber capabilities, but also sponsoring private groups. So essentially backing unaffiliated, quote unquote, hacking groups and giving them the resources and the latitude to be able to go do things with the kind of caveat that, hey, if we need you to infiltrate software on one of our enemies, that you'll stand up and do that. So quite a bit of investment has happened there. In terms of whether we should be worried or not, we absolutely should be. You know, this is the idea here is that by launching cyber attacks or ingesting malware, particularly into critical infrastructure, you can start the conflict before it starts by shutting down access to water or the internet or electricity and kind of hamstring us at home.
Are these groups directly controlled by the Iranian government, or, as you mentioned, are they just funding it like they have terrorist groups?
It's a little bit of both. It really depends. Certain countries invest more into their own, let's say, internal offensive capabilities. But Russia, for example, invests a lot of time, money, and effort into affiliate or proxy groups.
And when we talk about the areas in the infrastructure that are vulnerable to these kinds of attacks, are we talking about utilities, water, electricity, and how fortified is that kind of infrastructure from a cyber attack currently in America right now?
Yeah, so it is those avenues. You know, those are the kind of usual suspects of what it would take to kind of descend us into chaos quickly. It's an arms race, though, as all cybersecurity is. You know, as soon as we put up new safeguards, there are new threat vectors and things like that. The utilities in particular have come under a significant amount of attack recently across a number of different vectors. So you've got the traditional malware or phishing scams and those sorts of things to get at credentials to get inside of systems, but you also have the same national adversaries placing employees within the company so that they can inject software from the inside. And we've also recently seen malicious code actually being installed on the hardware. So on the controller chips for solar panels used by utilities, for example. So there's new places to be vigilant and new avenues that we're constantly fighting the fight against.
How seriously do you think the American government is taking this threat? And I'm just wondering, I always wonder with these things, is it better to have a centralized sort of center of gravity when it comes to protecting against these attacks, or is your strength actually decentralizing it, meaning it's over many different territories or places? That way it disperses the threat and it's not just one attack can do so much damage.
Yeah, so there's a sub-agency within the Department of Homeland Security called CISA, which is focused specifically on cybersecurity. They do some of the mandating and threat intelligence information dissemination to the different utilities. The problem really is when you're talking about getting down, particularly to the grassroots level of water utilities, where there's 50,000 water utilities in the U.S. The larger companies have the resources to kind of follow those CISA directives and implement new safeguards, but the local utilities are kind of woefully behind, both on budget and staffing around cybersecurity. There are a number of NGOs that have been stood up to kind of help with this sort of thing, but unfortunately, with the recent budget cuts and the focus on bootstrapping in Washington, a lot of those programs and NGOs have actually seen funding get cut pretty significantly. So it's the utilities are facing this problem of less resources at a time when they're facing increased threat.
And as we talk about the role of artificial intelligence, it seems to be pervasive pretty much everywhere these days. So what is the future of AI when it comes to hacking? And are we now in a world where hacking can be automated on a mass scale, directed to a particular target using artificial intelligence?
Yes. So the easy way to think about it is AI is the force multiplier. If we take email scams, for example, right? The days of the Nigerian prince sending you a poorly worded email about sharing his inheritance with you is a thing of the past, right? ChatGPT and other large language models allow you to put together really convincing scams and phishing attacks. You see the same sort of thing on actually direct infrastructure attacks and malicious code. These folks that were once a small group of folks working together to write viruses are now being able to leverage these technologies to put out much more malicious content on a much quicker scale, and also to be able to adapt against the safeguards. So there really is a war of artificial intelligence going on, where we're using it for threat monitoring and for hardening our systems, and they're using it to circumvent those practices.
Where do you see the future of this going, Damien?
It's a never-ending arms race, as it tends to be. The thing that we're focused on right now is, you can't ever prevent a breach 100% of the time, but having systems and safeguards in place to contain it as much as possible to prevent the spread. At the utility level, for example, they're doing a lot right now to remove the bridge between the IT, the information technology, and the OT, the operational technology, so that if a system does get compromised, for example, it's not affecting the grid itself.
All right. Damien, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Next on Full Circle Florida, most of our prescription drugs are actually sourced from other countries. What's the risk and what's being done about it? Dr. Bill Hennessy joins me here next. Welcome back to Full Circle Florida. America's medicine cabinet depends heavily on foreign countries, including China. Is that a national security risk? I recently spoke with Dr. Bill Hennessy to explore the dangers and what is being done about it. Dr. Hennessy, thanks for joining us again. We talked about this last time in terms of Trump's tariffs and the effect it could have on the price of medication, but we really didn't get to the heart of the matter, which is why has the United States become so dependent on other countries when it comes to their supply of medications?
Well, what we have going on here is follow the money. There is cheaper labor in other countries. There are lesser compliance regulations, which means there's less regulations to follow, so therefore less money to put toward compliance. And you have multiple pharmaceutical companies on the New York Stock Exchange that have headquarters in other nations, also due to favored tax status. So, it does come down to one word: money.
Well, we learned a valuable lesson during COVID and in the wake of COVID when it came to the supply chain. We saw all kinds of disruptions. Given our dependence on other countries to make not just the medications, but the actual ingredients for those pharmaceuticals, how vulnerable is the United States to supply chain disruptions?
So let's break it into two parts. We got brand name drugs and generic drugs. So the brand name drugs are about 15% of what we in the U.S. consume. You got about probably 82% is going to be generic, and a couple percent is specialty. So the brand name drugs, the almost half of them were made from Germany, Switzerland, and Ireland. Now, totally, most people probably thought, it's going to be China or India. No, China and India are for the APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, For the generic drugs, which don't cost that much, we can walk into a Walmart for a $4 a month prescription. So even a 10 or 20% tariff on $4 a month, that's not the issue. However, we know when there was no travel during the pandemic, we had difficulty getting drug ingredients from places like India and China into the United States. And that's where we need to, I think, better protect ourselves. Common things happen commonly. Let's make sure that we can have those drugs that are generic manufactured right here to serve the majority of the people.
Well, what is the ultimate end game for President Trump's tariffs as we bring it full circle back to topic number one? Is it to incentivize domestic production of prescription drugs, or are the tariffs sort of a negotiating tool to negotiate a better price for everyday Americans?
I think it's some of both. I would also note that I looked into the research the past day. Brand name drugs, the three countries I mentioned, and even the next three, there's a 0% tariff on brand name drugs. There's an exception so that they can come to the U.S. at a lower cost already. Plus, President Trump signed an executive order called favored nation status, where the U.S. must get the best deal the developed country currently with the best deal in the world gets. So this piece of legislation or suggestion of tariffs is not happening by itself. There is an executive order. There's also the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, and DOJ, Department of Justice, suing the pharmacy benefit management companies for illegal drug price fixing. And so we have an attack on multiple fronts to try to get the price of drugs down.
Well, Dr. Bill Hennessy, as always, we do appreciate your insight. Thank you, sir. Next on Full Circle Florida, Swamp King. Is alligator Alcatraz a stunt or a plan? And Trump's big, beautiful problem. Welcome back in here to Full Circle Florida, everyone. We are unpacking the new state budget and the alligator Alcatraz migrant facility. And joining us from Tallahassee, correspondent Forrest Saunders. All right, Forrest, the governor signed the $117 billion budget. What wins can DeSantis claim, and what's likely to spark criticism?
I think the biggest win, and potentially what might spark criticism, is that he says he's going to be able to preserve doing property tax reform in the next year, and that is because they did not cut a whole bunch of sales tax revenue from the budget. That was something that he got into a big kind of frustrating debate with the House Speaker over. You might remember House Speaker Danny Perez wanted to do a $5 billion sales tax cut. DeSantis wanted to do basically a rebate program for the same amount for homesteaded properties. And what we ended up with is $350 million worth of sales tax holidays. But DeSantis says now he has basically the ability to do more on property taxes next year. He's going to have to go to the voters. They're going to have to come up with a plan and put it on the ballot. But he said that preserved his opportunity to do more in the next session.
Okay, when the dust settles on this, who ultimately won the battle of egos and control between Governor DeSantis and House Speaker Danny Perez? How might that carry on into next year?
Well, I think it's definitely going to carry on into next year. You can still hear DeSantis throw barbs at the House Speaker whenever he does press events. I don't know how it exactly is going to shake out, but you know, DeSantis wields a lot of power. Even though he's a lame duck governor, his term is going to end. He's not going to be able to run for re-election until there is a gap basically between his time. If he wanted to come back in 4 or 8 years, he could do that. But ultimately, he has all of this power, the line item veto pen. He has the ability to veto legislation. He has the ability to call lawmakers back for special sessions. And he used all of those tools in his toolbox this legislative session. It definitely suggests that his power is waning over the legislature because you have so much of this bucking coming from the Florida House. But at the same time, I do think he probably comes out on top at the end of this session. It's just a question of what will it look like when they all come back next year.
All right, I got about a minute left here. We have to talk about alligator Alcatraz, and I hesitate to even call it by that name because I'm sort of doing the PR work for them. But first of all, why the political theater? No matter where you stand on this issue, there was so much political theater around this, right down to the name and the memes that were sent out with the alligators and all of this stuff that I think a lot of people find kind of ridiculous and unnecessary. Was this a publicity stunt, or is this a real actual plan on how they're going to handle illegal immigration?
Well, very simply, I think on its surface, it is a publicity opportunity, I think is what the governor's office would call it. I mean, this is him doing what he has done for years. All of his years as governor, he basically leans in on big red meat issues and delivers what he says are big wins for Republicans. Immigration and law enforcement, big ones, and that's what he's doing here. But the question is, what will be the practicality of this facility? Will the detainees be treated humanely? Will it get shut down with these lawsuits? A lot of those questions we don't have the answers to yet. I mean, Alligator Alcatraz is just now getting its first detainees. How will they be treated, and how will we make sure that there's proper oversight of the facility? Well, that remains to be seen. I know Democrats have been trying to get inside. They want to see what's going on, and they want to make sure that everyone's being treated fairly. But again, this is one of those things where time will tell.
Well, it certainly got the president's attention, so maybe that's what he wanted this week. Forrest Saunders from Tallahassee, as always, thank you. Okay, let's switch our focus now to Washington, D.C. and President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill as we bring in our political analyst this week, Dan Snell, back on the show. Dan, I'm curious, what is the bill's impact on middle-class Americans? If this thing, whether it passes, whether it doesn't pass, it comes with challenges and consequences, either way.
Yeah, and I think stability, if I would say one word, I think for middle-class America, they want to have things where they feel stable. And the tax cuts, as they have been, especially the child credits and a number of things that have impacted families, have been very good for America. And with what Trump promised with the tips and the overtime, and also for Social Security, the bump in some deductions for seniors, I think stability is the key there. I think the middle class looks at this. Besides the Homeland Security and the immigration benefits, I think they look at this as very, very important to just keeping things calm in their household.
One of the things it doesn't really do, though, is bring down the debt. In fact, quite the opposite. We're talking about trillions of dollars of extra debt that this bill brings because it is so big in scope. How does that impact the economy? It seems like, once again, we're kicking that can down the road out of necessity almost.
Yeah, excellent question, and that is something that really disappointed. Donald Trump is a very out-of-the-box creative thinker. And if I were the president, I would, as a separate entity, come up with some kind of idea that literally declares war on our national debt long-term, because the deficit in this bill is estimated to be about 2.5 to 3 trillion over 10 years. But then also they raise the cap on the national debt by 5 trillion. And that's something the American people really need to take a look at. And I think that does have an impact. I know Wall Street looks at it, whether the people in Washington want to admit it, Wall Street looks at it because we spend about 16% of our federal budget paying on that national debt. And so it's a huge thing that needs to be looked at. And I wish they would, on a one-off, create some kind of, just we had war bonds in World War II, let's have federal debt bonds where, they have a meme. Let's sell a meme to get down the national debt and see if it could go as big as Donald Trump's memes.
But, this is where it gets into the catch-22. If this bill never came up, or if it didn't pass, then you're looking at that huge tax increase, which would affect the economy and potentially cause higher unemployment. So there's this short-term pain versus long-term that I don't know how Washington ever gets out of that cycle.
Yeah, that's where I think they have to address it. As leaders and good stewards for our pocketbooks and the people they represent, they need to really look at the debt and the deficit issue on an ongoing basis. This bill has to pass because people have gotten used to now a number of years of tax threats, and we're used to that. And if we were to file our taxes next year and boom, we're owing a lot of money, it would really impact the economy. So I'm sure it will pass.
We've gotten used to a lot of things, haven't we? Difficult decisions to be made now and into the future. Dan Snell, thank you for your time and your insight. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Full Circle Florida continues after this. Thank you for watching us here on Full Circle Florida. We hope you'll join us again here next week. Have a good one.